Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another virtual museum lecture series presented by the St. Catharines Museum and Welland Canals Center. Our community is filled with diverse stories, and we recognize that our story begins with the Indigenous peoples of this land. We acknowledge that we are broadcasting this lecture on lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for millennia. And we would like to honor the centuries of Indigenous peoples who walked on Turtle Island before us. My name is Adrienne Petrie, and I'm the Visitor Services Coordinator here at the St. Catharines Museum and Welland Canal Center. Thank you very much for joining us this evening for a special bonus lecture. I am delighted to welcome Sara Nixon, our public programmer, to give our bonus lecture tonight. Yay! Bonus lecture. All right. We hope these lectures provide a bit of historical joy and also spark imagination and exploration of our city's rich history. If you're joining us for the first time, why not go back and view all the other lectures that have been presented in the last year and a couple weeks? There are now over 20 lectures for you to enjoy. Just look for the playlist Virtual Museum Lecture Series on our YouTube channel. A quick reminder for those of you watching through mobile devices, please check your audio settings in the YouTube app if you're having any audio problems. You may also not have access to the chat box, so you can always post comments or questions in the regular comments below the video. Please also feel welcome to ask questions in the chat box. We will moderate them during and at the end of the presentation. I'll be in the chat box. If you have any questions or issues, there is a slight delay in the broadcast as usual, so if we miss your question in the moment, we will get to it at the end of the presentation. At our lecture on April 27th, we announced the lecture series for the lineup for this fall. So of course, tonight is very exciting because it's a bonus lecture, but we're also very excited for the fall. As with the beginning of every lecture, I'd like to take a moment to hype up the upcoming series, so do mark your calendars. We're so excited to kick off the autumn series this year with a talk by Kathleen Powell titled Adventures in Housekeeping on September 21st. As the 20th century dawned with new excitement and a look forward to the next century, St. Catharines was in a period of growth and prosperity. Did that rosy picture translate into the home and domestic life? This lecture will look behind closed doors and catch a glimpse of the domestic sphere and how it was changing with the new century. On October 5th, we'll welcome special guest and local railroad historian Andy Panko to take us on a virtual train ride as we explore the rails, sidings, and rolling stock of the Welland Ship Canal Construction Railway, one of the busiest railways in Canada at the time of the canal construction. On November 2nd, on October 19th, I skipped myself, I will present Canada's Game in the Garden City, which will explore historical narratives and living memory about hockey in St. Catharines and what makes hockey so special and significant to so many in our community. On November 2nd, special guest, local historian and chair of the city's Heritage Advisory Committee, Brian Nari, will be here to discuss the early court system starting in the 1780s and various court cases and records from early St. Catharines in his talk, Woe Be to the Malefactors. That's how I'm expecting us to say this title every single time. It has to be said like that. It has to be said dramatically. Woe be to the malefactors. Early St. Catharines court records, and then a regular voice after that. Anyway, on November 16th, Sara will be back, and she'll use housing, suburban development, and sprawl as a lens to consider some of the major socioeconomic issues that face the people of St. Catharines in the 20th century. By paying close attention to housing trends and issues in the city over time, we can gain a vital insight into how big societal shifts impacted our community, from immigration to the Great Depression, the post-war boom, and more. On November 31st, Kathleen will explore when the world was plunged into war in 1914 and how everything changed. Life would never be the same for those who fought and for those left behind. This lecture is a personal look at the First World War through the eyes and the voices of those who lived through this life-changing moment in time. And that's our autumn lecture series for 2021. We hope you'll join us this fall. I sincerely hope that everyone has been enjoying our virtual lecture series, and I'd like to encourage you all to make a donation to the museum in support of our programming. Your donations help us to continue to provide the high quality and enjoyable programming that you have come to expect from us. We really appreciate any donation you're able to make. Please give us a call at 905-984-8880 and leave us a message, or send us an email at museum@stcatharines.ca, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Your donation makes a difference. Thank you. And now on to this evening's bonus lecture, woo, with Sara Nixon. Take it away, Sara.
Thank you so much for that very enthusiastic introduction. I'm so excited to be here today to share some of the new research that I've been looking into. So let's get started. Making sure I can change my slides. There we go. Okay, so in its self-described St. Catharines Yearbook, the Board of Trade painted the following picture of St. Catharines in 1913. Quote, "To come to St. Catharines in the summertime, and all nature will smile you a welcome. Come in the golden autumn and partake of luscious fruits whose flavors are not excelled elsewhere in God's broad dominions. The eyes of the stranger entering this garden of Canada, as the Niagara district is designated, are at once delighted, and as often been the case of late, from a casual call, acquaintance deepens until this one-time stranger discovers he has fallen in love with our fair land and progressive city, and he decides to remain with us. Words cannot adequately express the beauteous charms we have here. Only by a vision with your own eyes will you appreciate what nature has bestowed upon us. We extend to you our most cordial invitation to visit it." So perhaps this description is slightly romanticized, but as the precursor to today's Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce, it was, in part, the mission of the St. Catharines Board of Trade to boost the image and reputation of the city. Touting the opportunity available in St. Catharines and the prosperity enjoyed by the community, this Board of Trade publication intended to generate new investment into the city by capturing the interests of potential entrepreneurs, manufacturers, farmers, laborers, and residents to St. Catharines. So while this publication might have fashioned its narrative for a specific audience in mind, the 1913 St. Catharines Yearbook, which we have here, the first and second page, the yearbook offers an insightful snapshot of the city at a particular moment in time that is on the brink of what the Board of Trade predicted to be enormous economic growth and prosperity. Only we have the hindsight to know that in 1913, the city and country was approaching the brink of being drawn into a global war. In tonight's talk, I will offer an in-depth analysis of the 1913 St. Catharines Yearbook, the annual report of the St. Catharines Board of Trade, to gather a deeper understanding of the hopes, ideals, and values of the growing urban center on the eve of the First World War. By first situating St. Catharines within the broader context of life and society in the early 1900s, we can contextualize the narratives found in the yearbook's publication and trace the emergence of a dual identity embraced by the people of St. Catharines at a moment filled with potential and opportunity. Formally organized in 1872, a major cause of the St. Catharines Board of Trade was in, quote, developing the general trade and commerce of Canada and in the town of St. Catharines, Ontario in particular, by, quote, presenting a unified expression of opinion of the business and mercantile interests of the city to the various governments and city council of the day, end quote. The establishment of the St. Catharines Board of Trade may have been in part of a growing national movement at the time to strengthen and protect Canadian manufacturers from increasing American competition. Records show that the board was comprised of the more prominent businessmen of the community who used their reputations, connections, and power to further the interests of the merchants and manufacturers of the city. And while I could not confirm the Board of Trade Council in place in 1913, a 1907 publication lists a council of 14 members, including the likes of W.B. Burgoyne of the St. Catharines Standard newspapers and Alexander McLaren of the highly reputable McLaren department store of the time. Meeting on the third Wednesday each month, members of the Board of Trade focused on a wide variety of concerns and issues, from advocating for infrastructure development to calling on the municipal council to invest in snowplows for efficient snow removal. A major endeavor of the organization was also to put together reports and publications like this 1913 yearbook to highlight and promote the many strengths and achievements of the city in an ongoing crusade to attract new business and investment to the area. And such campaigns were credited for bringing a number of major industries to St. Catharines that would sustain and employ the community for generations. The St. Catharines Board of Trade reorganized and rebranded as the more familiar Chamber of Commerce in 1920. In 1913, St. Catharines was the urban and industrial center of the Niagara Peninsula. The capital of Lincoln County, government offices and the county courthouse were located downtown, as well as the district's largest market. In terms of trade and commerce, St. Catharines was the headquarters of the Welland Canal operations, and its downtown shops were known to carry, quote, stocks larger and superior to most cities of this size, end quote. The city was also the center of a vast network of transportation and communication lines covering Niagara. Situated on Lake Ontario and along the Welland Canal, shipping routes throughout the Great Lakes were highly accessible, as were the roadways and rail lines that crisscrossed through the district. At the time, rail was the dominant mode of transportation, and the Board of Trade made no hesitation to boast of all the rail lines that came through St. Catharines. 26 Grand Trunk passenger trains were said to stop at the St. Catharines station daily, and the city enjoyed local freight and passenger service to Meriton, Thorold, and Port Dalhousie, hourly cars to Port Colborne and Welland, Niagara Falls and Buffalo, as well as a direct connection to the Canadian Pacific, Michigan Central, Toronto, Hamilton, and Buffalo railways, as well as international railways and all U.S. trunk lines. The city was also the headquarters of the Niagara, St. Catharines, and Toronto, or NS&T Railway, and the annual report further claimed that new lines were now underway and, quote, plans for other roads are being projected, end quote, further enticing readers with the exciting future ahead for the city. Two particular statistics repeated throughout the Board of Trade yearbook also signal that by 1913, St. Catharines was enjoying the advances of the Second Industrial Revolution, that 80 industries operated within a 5-mile radius of the city center, all accessible by rail and canal, and that due to the proximity of DeQ Falls and Power Glen, the St. Catharines also had the lowest rates of, quote, electrical current for power, heat, and light. Electricity is largely credited with advancing industrialization towards mass production, enabling more production of goods at a faster rate with the development of assembly lines and electric-powered machinery. St. Catharines and the surrounding area were the sites of, quote, several of the largest pulp, paper, rubber, woolen, glass, iron, and steelware manufactories of Canada, end quote. And according to the Board of Trade, quote, these have located here because of the many advantages afforded in the way of good rail and boat transportation, cheap electric and water power, congenial surroundings which make their men happy and contented, and so conducive to their best work, end quote. And in a further assertion, quote, these captains of industry are coming to us, coming to this city that offers the best advantages for Canadian manufacture and distribution, end quote. So the map that I'm showing here was featured in the publication and is constantly referred to throughout by the authors. It highlights the 80 industries that you see with the numbers dotted all around, located within the 5-mile radius of the city center, which you see with the circles drawn on the map. And beyond the industries, it also maps the numerous shipping, rail, and roadways connected to the city, as well as the power lines that provided the city with electricity. All notions that the city was progressing well into the Second Industrial Revolution and well into the 20th century. So it was clear that by 1913, St. Catharines was already enjoying significant prosperity, but things were predicted to only get better. The year 1913 was particularly exciting for the city as construction of the new Welland Ship Canal, or the Fourth Canal, had just begun. With a projected 5-year completion period, it was expected that over $50 million, about 1.2 billion in today's dollars, would be invested in the project. And with St. Catharines, the headquarters of this gigantic operation, the largest construction project in Canadian history at the time, all of those dollars would move through the city's banks and supporting businesses. This was a big deal. And with this in mind, it only made strategic sense for the Board of Trade to capitalize on all of the great potential offered by the canal project and publish a report further establishing the city as a sought-after urban center by promoting its many advantages and advancements. The 1913 yearbook is a product of its time. Its pages are filled with carefully curated facts and figures, galvanizing its readers around the fervent future of growth, advancement, and prosperity for St. Catharines. The Board of Trade could have never predicted the outbreak of the First World War only 1 year later. A war that would wholly redirect the work and efforts of not only the entire city, but of the entire country. The outbreak of the war halted all canal construction. Industry transitioned towards the war effort, and investment refocused away from local to supporting the war effort overseas. But in 1913, the future for St. Catharines looked bright and the possibilities endless. The Board of Trade used the 1913 yearbook to frame St. Catharines as a highly sought after city. The book opens with a vibrant depiction of the city in an article titled St. Catharines Picturesque, which I quoted at the beginning of tonight's talk. This is followed by a brief history written by Catherine Mellon Merritt, granddaughter of the famed William Hamilton Merritt, which centers St. Catherine's narrative on the Welland Canal. Merritt's opening paragraph reads, quote, "The prosperity of St. Catherine's has always been centered around the development of the Welland Canal, and the knowledge that there is about to be projected an undertaking equal in some respects to the Panama Canal will bring the Garden City and its environs with renewed interest before the public." Fluff to capture the reader's intrigue, followed by pages of hard facts to secure their attention. On the facts and figures page, the Board of Trade provides a careful count of all the ways they saw fit to measure the growth of the city. Population had increased by 2,089 residents for a total of 14,471 in 1912, which meant an already established labor market and consumer market for investors. Building permits increased dramatically from $265,435 in 1911 to a whopping $811,335 in 1912. So in today's numbers, that would be from about $6 million in building permits to about $19 million in building permits. This was a signal of exponential growth and development in the city. A value of $32,400 worth of postage stamps were sold in the city, about $745,000 today, and postage would have been much, much cheaper back then. And an average daily telephone calls reached a high of 14,153 calls daily, with about 1,700 subscribers. Again, a signal that the community was highly connected and fully embracing the technology of the time. Further signs of advancement included infrastructure and services. At the time of publication, St. Catharines boasted 200 miles of electrical power lines, 47 miles of water mains, and 26 miles of sewers, 98 miles of trolley lines, and 7 1/3 miles of paved road. The Board of Trade even went as far to say that, quote, "St. Catharines probably has more miles of paved roadway and cement walks than any city of its size in Canada." Clearly a stat to be proud of. The city had 16 churches of various denominations, 7 public schools, 4 separate schools, a high-grade collegiate and up-to-date business college, 3 hospitals, a city-paid police force and fire brigade, 2 daily newspapers, and 2 telegraph offices. Furthermore, the 80 industries within the 5-mile radius employed about 7,000 workers, with an average weekly payroll of about $85,000, which equals about $2 million in today's terms. This money was expected to go back into the local economy, a kind of like music to the ears of future investors in the city, right? So these statistics and numbers and data were all signs that St. Catharines was embracing technological innovation and becoming a modern urban hub. And throughout the report, the Board of Trade really sought to sell St. Catharines to 4 primary types of investors: the manufacturer, the farmer, the laborer, and the resident. In an article titled "A Page of Queries," the authors summarized the entire report into one clean page to clearly outline what the city could offer these groups. So this is all a giant quote. What can we offer the manufacturer? Attractive sites, unequaled shipping and railway accommodation, cheap electric power, unlimited water power, natural gas, artificial gas, city owned, pure water, cheap lighting, low tax rates, and a steady supply of labor and good housing. What can we offer the farmer? An exceptional climate, the finest fruit soil in the world, a sand loam soil specially adapted to tender fruits, where about 85% of the fruit are peaches, grapes, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, gooseberries, currants, cherries, and plums. Unlimited markets within easy distance, cheap transportation, cold storage, numerous canning factories, and a good social community. What can we offer the working man? An increasing demand for his labor in 80 factories. They love that number. And also on fruit farms, good housing in a healthful locality and a moderate cost of living, pleasant outdoor summer and early fall employment for women and children during fruit season in picking and packing fruit. What can we offer the resident? An excellent choice of property in one of the most beautiful and picturesque cities in Canada, near the lakeshore, with boating, bathing, fishing, bowling, golfing, shooting, with ample trips to Toronto, Hamilton, Niagara Falls, and Buffalo. Climatic conditions conducive to good health and enjoyment of life. Educational facilities unparalleled. So I would love to know what stood out to you in this very detailed description of all St. Catharines could offer in 1913. Within these details, the Board of Trade seemed to use the same brush to paint two different pictures of the city, at the same time promoting St. Catharines as both industrial and pastoral, advanced and traditional, productive and leisurely. The emergence of a dual identity. The authors of the publication seem to almost be grappling between touting St. Catharines as a city of industry, opportunity, and development, while also painting an idyllic and picturesque aesthetic of the city. On a page aptly titled "A Few Advantages," the Board of Trade flaunted that the urban center was in close proximity to brickyards, cement factories, stone quarries, and gravel pits, which would have all been necessary for construction and infrastructure development, while also noting at the same time that St. Catharines residents enjoyed, quote, neat and attractive homes with well-kept lawns on nicely shaded streets. Even further, in between the sections on St. Catharines military and the agricultural industry was a whopping 3-page spread dedicated to the Horticultural Society, highlighting all the ways that the society, which was formed in 1899, was working to, quote, improve the horticultural surroundings of the Garden City and District, claiming to be the largest of any society in the province, with a membership of about 1,000. The Horticultural Society organized public meetings and lectures on topics of interest, hosted exhibitions, distributed seeds, plants, bulbs, flowers, shrubs, and trees to community members to encourage, quote, the improvement of home and public grounds. Returning to the St. Catharines Picturesque article at the top of the yearbook, the first introductory paragraph of the entire publication makes extraordinary effort to paint the idyllic scenery of the city above all else. Quote, here the horticulture and floriculture are developed in the highest sense, for the soil is fertile and the climate ideal. Abundant crops reward the farmer as well as the market gardener. Flowers bloom everywhere. clothing the land in a myriad of color schemes, delicate and dazzling. Even the downtown was painted with the same mesmerizing brushstrokes. Few cities can boast of their principal business thoroughfare having a vista of vale and hill equal to that of St. Paul Street. You can overlook the winding of the old Welland Canal with slopes like old English downs rising up from it and melting into distant meadows and golf links until the green is merged into the blue shadows of the mountain. Let's just take a moment to let that vivid imagery sink in. Quote, a vista of vale and hill melting into distant meadows, the blue shadows of the mountain. These words were carefully crafted to evoke a specific response from the reader, a sudden yearning to frolic in the meadows and live happily ever after in St. Catharines, Ontario. Now the emphasis that the St. Catharines Board of Trade placed on civic beauty was not unique to the city, but it rather emerged out of a larger City Beautiful movement in North America. Originating in the United States in the 1890s, the movement focused on urban planning efforts to beautify rapidly industrializing cities through architectural harmony, unified design, and visual aesthetic. The City Beautiful was a response to the negative impacts of industrialization and urbanization, namely overcrowding and reduced living conditions as an influx of people migrated to city centers for employment opportunities, rising pollution as manufacturing increased, and erecting towering utility poles that blemished the streets. The City Beautiful movement centered around the idea that efforts of urban beautification, elegant parks and gardens, recreational waterways, spacious public plazas, for example, these would enhance a city as an ideal utopia, which in turn would improve the moral and social characters of its citizens. Under City Beautiful, citizens were seen to value, respect, and keep their surroundings beautiful and tidy, and thereby more modern and socially refined. To beautify the urban environment as a whole was socially beneficial, improving the lives of the citizens who lived there. Oh, too soon. While the idea of City Beautiful was all well and good, actually, I'm gonna let you guys look at this for a second. So while the idea of City Beautiful was all well and good, in practice, it was challenging to implement without an organized effort and prioritized funds. Other than in Ottawa and Regina, Canadian cities often only had the resources to adopt elements of the movement rather than embrace City Beautiful in its entirety. And rather than being coordinated by municipal council and staff, City Beautiful efforts in Canadian cities were often taken up by local horticultural societies, civic improvement associations, and even boards of trade. These citizen-led groups enacted small projects inspired by the ideals of City Beautiful, like flower box displays in downtown, street planting tree initiatives, landscaping public buildings and rail stations, and creating new gardens and parks for citizens to enjoy. So while there perhaps is an opportunity to spend another lecture looking at how specifically City Beautiful informed St. Catharines civic planning at the local level, Within the 1913 Board of Trade Yearbook, we can see elements of City Beautiful in the way the authors chose, in what the authors chose to emphasize in their publication, like those very romantic descriptions of the landscape around St. Catharines, the significant page real estate given to the Horticultural Society, and in the images sprinkled throughout the publication of the impressive architecture in the city. So what I'm showing here are 3 different pages scattered throughout the Board of Trade Yearbook that really highlight some of the more impressive architectural features of the city, all very stately-like, all very impressive, made of stone or brick, have very nice gardens surrounding them, very well landscaped. These would have been elements of a City Beautiful, and the idea that pretty cities, pretty urban centers would encourage the people who lived there to be socially refined and a little bit more civilized, I guess. One specific example of how citizen groups in St. Catharines were inspired by the City Beautiful movement was the initiative undertook by the St. Catharines Horticultural Society in 1913, and of course, given prominence in the Board of Trade report, to distribute 3,000 packets of aster seeds, a daisy-like perennial flower, to, quote, pupils in the schools of the Garden City, in hopes of fostering what the society framed as, quote, an endless chain of interest cultivated in the children, which in future years will maintain and enhance the beauties of the Garden City, end quote. Such projects aim to instill the values and importance of civic beauty into even its youngest citizens. St. Catharines was well aware that the city's geography and proximity to farmland and leisure space was a major attractor for industry. In the yearbook's St. Catharines industrial section, the authors write, quote, "We have something here that is good, something that will make St. Catharines a city many times its present size. If we had not a splendid geographical location and were not situated in a rich fruit belt, men of wealth and business foresight would not be so interested. But they are coming here with their money and investing it right here in St. Catharines." Of the 80 factories the Board of Trade boasted in that 5-mile radius, 56 were located in St. Catharines proper, with 3 in Port Dalhousie, 7 in Meryton, and 14 in Thorold. Leading factories in St. Catharines at the time of the publication will be familiar to local history enthusiasts. McKinnon Dash and Metalworks, the precursor to General Motors, the Rio Motor Car Works, Packard Electric Light Company, Welland Manufacturing Company, Taylor and Bate Brewing, and Dominion Canning, to name a few. However, while industry surely brought the employment and wealth and investment that the city hoped for, with this also came consequences proponents of City Beautiful so reviled: pollution, poor sanitation, grimy living conditions, overcrowding, and perhaps worst of all, architecture built for practicality rather than grandeur. As the industry expanded in St. Catharines, so did the city's population. Not only were more and more young workers coming to the urban center for employment opportunities, but also an increasing number of immigrants, especially from poorer non-English speaking countries in Southern and Eastern Europe. A look at the 1911 Census of Canada reveals that while those of British heritage made up about 80% of St. Catharines' total population, numbers were on the rise for those of Chinese, Greek, Jewish, Italian, Polish, Scandinavian, and Turkish origins. And residents at this time were not as welcoming to newcomers. Racial prejudice stereotyped immigrants as disorderly. Read here, different languages spoken and traditions practiced. So they were considered other and thus disorderly. Residents also blamed these newcomers for taking jobs away from the local labor force. Visible minorities were also forced to live away from established white neighborhoods. For example, a 1914 letter to the editor entitled Foreign Citizens in an unnamed newspaper advocated that residents should, quote, have a say where the Pollocks and other foreigners should be located, and they should also be taxed for keeping such a lot of lodges, unquote. As a result of such local sentiments, ethnic clusters would form around the sites of major employers. In one example, bunk houses were built north of Beach Street to accommodate the Armenian laborers at McKinnon on Ontario Street. These boarding houses would have separate bedrooms and a shared kitchen, as well as meeting rooms for reading, school, and religious practices. Eventually, these temporary living conditions gave way to family homes in the same neighborhoods, and halls and churches were built as communal gathering spaces. Still, similar to most urban centers at this time, living conditions among immigrant communities in St. Catharines suffered from overcrowding and poor sanitation. A 1915 report found large families in small homes, sometimes up to 16 people in a 5-room home. And that's not 5 bedrooms, that's a 5-room home. And while most of these homes had access to running water, less than half had proper indoor toilets, and even fewer had proper waste disposal systems. The picture that I have here features poor living conditions in the Facer Street neighborhood a couple decades later in 1941. This will be a part of the talk I'll be giving in November about general housing practices and trends in St. Catharines in the 20th century. Now, poor living conditions among immigrant working class in 1913 and the early 1900s, these would only be increased and more dramatized by the much anticipated Welland Canal construction project, where upwards of 3,000 laborers would be on the job at one time, mostly single men newly arriving to Canada. These workers would also live in boarding camps located close to the sections in which they worked. It is very unlikely that the Board of Trade was going to ever highlight these immigrant workers' enclaves in their publication. In fact, the report makes no mention of immigration at all, despite immigrants making up a growing number of St. Catharines' labor force, especially in the industries that the Board of Trade was boasting so highly in this publication. A much feared consequence of overcrowding in urban centers was an increase in rowdy and immoral behavior among the working classes. While immigrant workers lived in their segregated clusters, they and their local counterparts would often go into town after their long work days to find drinking establishments, or even worse, unofficial sources for drinking. This led to fights on the streets and other illicit activity that was disproportionately publicized in the newspapers and further deepened racial prejudices held by other St. Catharines residents. But rather than address any of these issues head on, members of the Board of Trade ignored them and instead drew on the ideals and promises of a city beautiful to frame the city as being above urban squalor. Making no mention of the poor living conditions of immigrant workers, the Board of Trade instead chose to emphasize that prospective workers could expect, quote, attractive labor conditions, unquote, and that residents had, quote, an excellent choice of property in one of the most beautiful and picturesque cities in Canada, end quote. And completely ignoring any issues of increasing disorderly behavior among the growing urban population, the publication instead highlighted the many leisurely activities St. Catharines offered that did not involve alcohol and could detract from any immoral behavior. The working man in St. Catharines, they promoted, had the option of relaxing in the healing, health-giving saline waters and mineral baths of the Welland House, or could enjoy swimming, fishing, and boating on the lakeshore. However, the Board of Trade did understand that as more manufacturing industries came to St. Catharines, the demand for labor would also increase. So they did make a roundabout attempt to address the issues of urban overcrowding without directly naming it. In the St. Catharines industrially section of the report, the authors write, quote, judging from the way industries are coming to St. Catharines, this city will soon have doubled and trebled its population. Industries demand an increased population from which to obtain employees, and the very fact of having industries here which are able to employ thousands of hands will make our city grow at a phenomenal rate. The Board of Trade claimed that St. Catharines was particularly well positioned to take on all of these new industries and could sustain a rapidly increasing labor force because of the available land surrounding the city. They observed, quote, building operations are very brisk. Over 200 homes were erected last year. Look where you will, and you will see new homes going up. The sound of the hammer is heard on all sides. The end is not yet. There is still room and occupants for more. The solution for urban overpopulation was suburban development. And at the time of the publication, the construction of the new Ontario Street Bridge, later known as Glenridge Bridge, was just nearing completion and would connect the heart of the city to the land on the other side of the old canal, which promised, quote, to become the most exclusive residential section of the city, end quote. Informed by City Beautiful planning concepts, the report noted that under the supervision of an expert landscape architect, quote, miles of streets are being graded, trees planted equidistant on either side, sidewalks are being laid, and attention is being paid to the aesthetic so that houses with varied styles of architecture and with a minimum cost, according to the street on which they are located, will set in most pleasant and picturesque surroundings. This exclusive residential section is now known as the Old Glenridge neighborhood, and the design features of its streets continue to be an excellent example of the major City Beautiful principles of coherence, visual variety, and grandeur. From the many examples shared here tonight, I don't quite think the people of St. Catharines actually saw their two identities as both industrial and picturesque as contrasting or conflicting. Rather, residents at the time believed that the two could work in harmony. The promises of the new Glenridge community were proof to St. Catharines citizens that industry could fuel urban beauty, pavement and paradise could coexist. This here is an advertisement that was published in the St. Catharines Standard in May of 1913. And in this ad, it declares that, quote, no improvement in the history of the city of St. Catharines has meant so much to her growth and progress as the bridging of the old Welland Canal and consequent connecting up of the heart of the city with Glenridge. It goes on to state that Glen Ridge will be the home of the best people in the Niagara Peninsula, the home of the influential citizens of 5 industrial centers, the successful businessman, the man of money, and the thrifty worker will find suitable locations for their ideal homes. It emphasizes this area of prosperity and development while still also emphasizing the ideals of City Beautiful. Quote, along the banks of the canal, park reserves have been set aside, which will be preserved in their natural state for the use of the residents of Glen Ridge. The winding driveway will circle the property, a most attractive boulevard for the automobilist and the man who enjoys fine scenery. Glen Ridge is the crystallization of the ideals of this substantially growing city of homes, the results of an imperative demand for a better St. Catharines residence section. Industry promised investment, and investment enabled the people of St. Catharines to hold on to their romanticized image as St. Catharines picturesque or the Garden City. St. Catharines could do both, invite further development and industrialization while still embracing all its qualities of urban beauty. St. Catharines was the headquarters of the Welland Canal. Niagara is a hub for trade, industry, and manufacturing, yet also the Garden City, surrounded by a vista of vale and hill. This was a deliberate choice. Rather than grappling with either or, the Board of Trade and the people of St. Catharines embraced a dual identity. This duality is why St. Catharines saw itself as the model city. Quote, the St. Catharines of today is looked upon as an almost model city, a city where the inhabitants are alive to the fact that they have a grand heritage in the geographical situation of their city and in the sturdy industries that are locating here. On one of the final pages of the Board of Trade report is a series of quotes given by anonymous visitors to the city. They each speak of the promises so very close to St. Catharines' grasp. I'll read a few. St. Catharines has a bright future than St. Catharines has a brighter future than almost any city in Ontario. St. Catharines will grow no matter what forces may attempt to detract her. What St. Catharines will be in 10 years or even 5 years cannot be conceived. With the knowledge that the First World War would break out only 1 year after the publication of this report, these quotes each ring eerily true in a different way. When war was declared in August of 1914, the enthusiasm of the people of St. Catharines held towards the city's engorging prosperity, this was entirely redirected towards the war effort. Thousands had gathered in the streets that morning on the day that the war was declared, cheering, throwing their hats in the air, singing God Save the Queen. There was music, celebration, and fervorous pride for Britain and the Empire. Patriotism and civic duty seeped into all aspects of life. No longer were the people of St. Catharines focused on individual growth and prosperity as they were on serving king and country. Industries in St. Catharines shifted its manufacturing towards the war effort. Numerous factories began to manufacture shrapnel shells and fuses like Renault motor cars and Packard Electric. Canada Haircloth rerouted production to manufacture uniforms, and manufacturers like McKinnon's built entirely new facilities on their premises to increase their production capacity specifically for the war effort. Industry in St. Catharines was certainly flourishing as predicted by the Board of Trade, but now it was fueled by entirely different sentiments. Again, focusing on serving king and country, the war effort, rather than individual growth and prosperity to encourage local investment. Construction of the Welland Canal continued until 1916, though facing significant labor and resource shortages. The hopes of the project completing within 5 years were quickly dashed, and the $50 million promised to be invested in the city was redirected towards the war effort instead. Citizen groups also largely redirected efforts towards the war. Instead of public garden tending and seed sharing among local schools, to beautify the city, citizens funneled all of their energy towards fundraising, food drives, knitting socks, and collecting comforts for soldiers overseas. And while development continued, like road work, bridge building, and suburban growth, progress was slow and much more expensive. The prominence of city beautiful ideals really gave way to efficiency, cost effectiveness, and the practical needs of the citizens of the time. Yet the dual identity embraced by St. Catharines endured throughout the war and afterwards. Industry very much drove the city's efforts towards the war. Industrial expansion greatly altered the cityscape in response to wartime demands. If there was ever a moment to rid the city of its picturesque image of itself and fully embrace the grit and might of its industry, it was during the First World War. But no, the people held strongly onto their identity as the Garden City. St. Catharines, as both industrial and pastoral, advanced and traditional, productive and leisurely, this duality continues to drive our city today. We remain the Garden City, still the namesake of many local businesses, a landmark on the QEW, and a symbol imbued in every park and public garden space in St. Catharines. Over 100 years after the 1913 Board of Trade Yearbook was published, our city now faces a post-industrial reality. Where were once 80 industries within that 5-mile radius, a number are now brownfields and deserted lots, the sad remnants of a once prosperous past. Still, for the people of St. Catharines, our identity is irrevocably tied to this past. And perhaps we can leverage our dual identity here of both the picturesque and the industrial to regenerate brownfields into something better. Our nostalgia for the Garden City may offer us opportunity to again be a model city, not in 1913 values and standards, but in today's. Repurposing vacant buildings into affordable housing, revitalizing old factory sites into parkland and green space, nurturing new industries and supporting innovation, protecting the environment and climate so unique to the Niagara Peninsula so that future generations too can enjoy our fruit orchards. Let's continue to embrace St. Catharines' dual identity and do something really cool with it. I find hope in what one of the visitors to our city said back in 1913, quote, what St. Catharines will be in 10 years or in 5 years cannot be conceived. Yes, that certainly still rings true today. All right, thanks everyone for joining my talk today.
Thank you, Sarah. What a wonderful bonus lecture. Thank you so much. That was a really, really neat lecture.
Thank you.
Great job. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. There are a few questions and comments in the chat box, but I'm sure we'd love a few more. If you have any you'd like to put in the chat box, please go ahead. So go ahead and do that now. Thank you very much. And thank you again to Sara for an excellent bonus lecture. While we wait for a few further questions and comments that might be ringing in your heads into the chat box, please consider making a donation to the museum. And again, thank you all for your support this season of the virtual museum lecture series. We kind of had a fake send-off for the summer last time on April 27th, but this is the real summer send-off this time. So thank you again, everyone, for your support of the virtual museum lecture series. Again, if you've enjoyed tonight's presentation, indeed all the presentations, I know some of you have seen all of them, please do consider making a donation to the museum. You can call us at 905-984-8880 and leave a message and we'll get back to you, or send us an email at museum@stcatharines.ca. Of course, with our wonderful guests and me and Kathleen and Sara, we have now delivered over 20 lectures. So definitely check out the playlist of previous lectures on our YouTube channel and share the playlist with your friends and family. Of course, there's nothing wrong with going back and watching all the lectures again. You might pick up something new the second time around. We'd also like to remind everyone to please like, follow, subscribe, and all that stuff on our social media channels, including here on YouTube, WordPress, and our podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you enjoy our content, please share it in your networks to help more of our community join the historical adventures. Speaking of, we'll see you all again. Next slide, Sarah. I'm really happy with this slide, how this slide turned out. I love that we have 6 lectures in the fall because they nicely fit on the slide. 5 lectures would ruin this layout. Anyway.
That's why we did it.
That's why we have 6. Speaking of the lecture series, so we'll see you again this fall for the autumn lecture series. We're so excited. It looks like such an interesting fall lineup. We're really, really excited. Of course, if you have any ideas for future lectures, we're now thinking about winter 2022. Can you believe it? But until then, have a very safe and happy summer. The Virtual Museum Lecture Series is produced by the St. Catharines Museum and Welland Canal Center and the City of St. Catharines. So now we'll take your questions and comments. Starting off, Sara, there's a bunch of comments. Wonderful, wonderful comments. Great job. Kathy says, Des says, first of all, everyone says hello, so that's nice.
Hello.
It has been a while since we've spoken with everyone, so hello. Sara, you mentioned, Des says, Sara, you mentioned the term the Garden City. Was 1913 the first time it was used?
Great question. I wasn't able to pin down exactly when it was used, but I know that late 1900s, it's late 1800s rather, as more nurseries and farms started to pop up around in St. Catharines proper and around. That's when we really started to be known as the Garden City, but it mostly had to do with the greenhouses, or I guess the nurseries for plants and shrubs and flowers that then would be used to plant around the city. That's where we got our name, and that started to pop up in the mid to late 1800s.
Yeah, the horticultural society that I think you mentioned, Sara, as being, one of the most important groups in the city for a long time, was founded in 1830 by our pal Chauncey Beadle. And they had started using it just internally in the horticultural society in the 1850s and 60s. So yeah, you're right. Like I think it was sort of a vision goal, when you like sort of have a strategic plan and you have a rebranding exercise and that kind of thing. So that by the turn of the century, for sure, we were known as the Garden City. So definitely by 1913, it's widely known, and you can see it on postcards of the city as early as 1890, but it's almost on every single postcard. Just talking about postcards because of our exhibit, but it's almost on every single postcard in that time frame. So probably as early as being like someone thought of it as like a cute marketing name in the 1850s in the Horticultural Society, and then it really took off at the turn of the century, as you said, Sarah. Awesome. Jerry says, can't help but wonder what this 1913 model city looked like in 1918 after the war and Spanish flu. Definitely. It would be really neat to see how the Yearbook or the Chamber of Commerce or Board of Trade, I forget when they changed their name, you mentioned, dealt with post-war St. Catharines. And indeed, like, again, the Depression, like what the Depression did to the city too. We haven't quite gotten into that in the lecture series yet. Of course, lots of writing has been done about it, but I think we'll get into more of that in your next lecture specifically about what the human experience was on the ground in your next lecture. So that's great. Kathy says, great look at St. Catharines. Oh, did you want to say something, Sarah?
Oh, no, just to that, I think, that's definitely going to be part of my talk in November. But, in 1918, we did have the expansion of industry that the Board of Trade was hoping for, but again, not for different reasons. So we did have this new capacity, but we come back devastated after the First World War, and that changes our mentality towards growth, our mentality towards community. We have a significant housing shortage in St. Catharines and Canada after 1918. So there's a lot happening, and that will definitely be part of my talk in November.
It's kind of interesting. Some of the themes are very cyclical with today. I think we could probably imagine like the amount of effort that's been put into downtown as sort of like the cultural hub of the region over the last 10 years. And then to have this like sort of shocking emergency and suspend all of that for such a long period of time. There might not be a physical, like an obvious physical change in the next couple of years to the landscape, but there might be, there is definitely a change to how people are using that landscape. So that's kind of, and like, things happen. Wow. Deb says the city still gives away trees for residents. That's true. You can actually apply. If you have a boulevard on your property, you can contact our colleagues. I forget which department specifically. Do you know which department, Sarah, it is specifically? The trees folks. It's our colleagues in the Parks and Programs and Cultural Services. No. Oh gosh, this is not great. But anyway, at the city, you can apply for a tree if your boulevard is empty and you need a tree. You can get a tree. Absolutely. And this is the time to do it, apparently. And then Briggs says, thanks, Sarah. And so does Deb. Thanks for sharing this information. So with that, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you again, Sarah. And we'll leave it there. Have a wonderful, safe summer, and we'll see you all in the fall.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you soon.